In this video, we'll look at 5 proficiency reports. The Class Proficiency Chart Report, the Class Proficiency Report, the Student Proficiency Report, the Student Coverage Lapses Report, and the Compare Classes Report. All of these reports measure your students' proficiency in different learning objectives or other standards. So the questions in your assignments must be tagged with some type of standard for these reports to provide valid data. Let's start with the Class Proficiency Chart Report. The Class Proficiency Chart Report provides a visual way to gauge your students' proficiency by using easy-to-read icons for between 3 and 5 proficiency levels. To create a Class Proficiency Chart Report, right-click a class. Then click Proficiency Chart Report from the report list. In the Report Options dialog, you can filter the assignments that appear in the list by either selecting a term you created in the Classes and Assignments section, or by selecting a date range. In the assignment list, you can click the assignments you want to report on. By default, all the assignments are selected. You can also select which type of standard you want to report on. The available standards include Common Core State Standards, National Standards, State Standards, Local Standards, Accrediting Standards, Learning Objectives, Corporate Standards, and Rubric Criteria. The questions in my assignments are tagged with learning objectives, so I'll select that from the Focus drop-down list. You can specify how many proficiency levels you want. You can select between 3 and 5 levels. You can also adjust the grade ranges for the different proficiency levels. Finally, you can show the descriptions of the standards at the end of the reports. Let's click OK to run the report. At the top of the report are the proficiency levels and the corresponding icons. For example, a red donut indicates that the student received a score between 0 and 59.9% on questions tagged with a specific standard. And a solid green circle indicates a score of 90 to 100% on a standard. These icons make it easy to quickly scan through several standards and to spot patterns. For each learning objective, you can see the number of questions given on that standard. Along the top of the report is a list of your student names. For each student and standard, there is an icon indicating that student's proficiency level on that standard. Let's look at the second learning objective. We can see that students have been given 4 questions for that standard across 1 or more assignments. Joyce, Marty, and Lee are all in the 90 to 100% proficiency range. Amy is in the lowest range, so she's not proficient in this learning objective. Jess has an NA under her name indicating that she hasn't taken any tests that contain questions tagged with this learning objective. An NA usually means that a student has missed or hasn't taken an assignment yet. As with any report, you can print a PDF, download a CSV, or change the parameters of the report and rerun it. If you want more information about a standard, you can click the magnifying glass icon next to the standard ID. You can see how the proficiency chart can give you a high-level view of your students' proficiency. Now, let's look at the Class Proficiency Report for more detailed information. Like the Class Proficiency Chart Report, the Class Proficiency Report also deals with standards, but it gives you a different way to view the data. Let's start by right-clicking a class. And then select Proficiency Report. Again, we can filter the report list. And we have a Focus drop-down list where we can select a standard. We can also set the minimum proficiency level field like we did in the Proficiency Chart Report, and also display a list of standard descriptions at the end of the report. But we can now show references and remediation information if it is available for the questions or the tests. Finally, we can specify which students we want to display under each standard: non-proficient students, proficient students, or both. By default, the non-proficient students option is selected. Let's select learning objectives from the Focus drop-down and then click OK to run the report. The standards covered by the assignments we selected are listed in the report. For each standard, we have the standard number, the number of items given for that standard, the class average on that standard, a performance bar, and the number of proficient students. We set our level at 70%. So students need to score 70% or better on the questions tagged with a standard to be considered proficient on that standard. We can click the magnifying glass next to a standard ID to see its description. The bar next to each standard gives you information about your student's distribution across the proficiency spectrum. The solid bar shows the average score for your student on this standard. For this learning objective, the average is 90%. The shaded blue area shows where 70% of your class falls along the spectrum. In this case, 70% of our students are between 50% and 100% proficient. If you're ever unsure what the bar means, you can mouse over it and you'll see the details of the distribution. Because we chose to display non-proficient students, their names appear under the learning objectives. We can click the icon next to a student to open their Student Proficiency Report. This report shows the student's proficiency compared to the class overall. We'll look at this report in more detail in the next section. We've seen how to drill down to the Student Proficiency Report. Now, let's run the report directly. We'll start by expanding a class. We'll right-click Jess Middleton to bring up a list of reports. Then we'll select Proficiency Report. As with any report, we can filter the report list. Because it's a student report, we can select a student from the student drop-down. We're going to click the checkbox at the top of the report list to select all the assignments. We'll select learning objectives from the focus drop-down. And because the questions are tagged with reference information, we'll select the Show Reference checkbox to include that information in the report. For each learning objective, we have the ID. The reference information appears under the ID. It helps the student know what to review if they're having trouble with a particular objective. In the example, the student should review Lesson 1.1 to improve their proficiency on this learning objective. Each objective also lists the number of items the student has seen for that objective, their score on those items, the number of points earned, a bar chart of their performance, and an indicator if they're proficient in that objective or not. The bar next to each standard in the student report is a little different than the one in the class report. In the student report, the solid bar shows the student's score for this standard. For this learning objective, the student's score is 50%. The shaded blue area shows where 70% of your class falls along the spectrum. In this case, 70% of our students are between 50% and 100% proficient. So Jess is at the lower end of the proficiency range for the class. If you're ever unsure what the bar means, you can mouse over it and you'll see the details of the distribution. The Coverage Lapses report identifies standards that an individual student has not been tested on as much as the rest of the class. These lapses usually occur because the student has missed one or more assignments. The report can help you formulate a plan to get the student caught up. To create a Coverage Lapses report for a student, we start by expanding a class. Let's right-click Lee to open the report list. And select Coverage Lapses Report. In the Settings dialog, we can select a student and select a standard to report on. Next, we set the coverage threshold range. This option specifies which standards to show in the report by comparing the number of items a student has completed versus the number completed by the entire class. It defaults to 50%. At this level, the report will show any of the selected standards where the student has completed 50% or fewer items than the rest of the students. So if the other students have completed 4 items for a standard and the student has only completed 2, then that standard will display on the report. But if the student completed 3 items, then that standard wouldn't be included. By default, the Recommend Assignment checkbox is selected. This will include assignments that contain questions tagged with a standard, so you know which assignments the student needs to complete to catch up. Let's select learning objectives from the focus list and click OK. The report has a row for each learning objective or standard the student is behind on. We have the standard ID and the number of items the student has completed for that standard. In this example, We can see that Lee hasn't completed any items for the first learning objective. Next, we have the average number of items the other students in the class have completed. Below the standard ID is the recommended assignment. So we would be able to tell Lee that she needs to complete the Chapter 3 test to catch up. Let's take a look at Joyce's report and compare it to Lee's. Based on the coverage threshold we set, Joyce doesn't have any lapses. She's in line with the rest of the class. The Compare Classes report provides data on the standards covered in 2 classes. It's helpful if you're teaching multiple sessions of the same class and need to know how the classes are performing on different learning objectives or other standards. This is a class report, so let's right-click our first class and select the Compare Classes report. First, we need to select the 2 classes we want to compare. I'm teaching 2 developmental math classes, one on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and another on Tuesday and Thursday. We right-clicked the Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, so that class appears in both the Class 1 and Class 2 dropdowns. Let's select the Tuesday, Thursday class from the Class 2 dropdown list, so that we're comparing 2 different classes. Like all the proficiency reports, we can select the standard from the focus dropdown and set the minimum proficiency level. Let's select learning objectives from the focus list. To ensure that a standard has been evaluated sufficiently, enter a value in the Include Standards with a minimum number of items option. This option specifies the minimum number of items that must be covered in order for a particular standard to be included in the report. We'll accept the default of 5 and click OK. Under the report title is the list of classes we're comparing. Class 1 is the Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, and Class 2 is the Tuesday, Thursday class. For each standard, we have the standard ID. Then, a count of the number of items completed for that standard for each class. In this example, the Monday, Wednesday, Friday class completed 2 more items than the Tuesday, Thursday class. Next, there is a class average for each learning objective. We can see that even though Class 1 had more items for this learning objective, they scored lower on the items than Class 2. The final 2 columns contain the proficiency levels for the 2 classes. 80% of Class 1 is proficient in the first learning objective versus 100% in Class 2. We can see a bigger difference in the last learning objective where the first class still had 2 more items, but their average was only 40% and their proficiency level was only 20%. You can see how this report is helpful for spotting trends and how it can assist you in keeping classes in line with each other. And those are the 5 proficiency reports that you can use to evaluate your students' performance on learning objectives and other standards.